Good day, classmates. This is Michelle Ochoa, and I'm reporting on moral discourse and corporate social responsibility reporting under Reynolds and Youthas 2007. Stakeholders may be seen as outsiders in a company, but in reality, they are extremely important and vital to the success of the institution or the corporation. Adopting a relational view requires stakeholder engagement not only in prescribing reporting requirements, but also in discourse relating to core aspects of the corporations, such as mission, values, and management systems. Habermas' theory of communicative action provides guidelines for engaging stakeholders in this moral discourse. Here are some examples of reporting used in CSR. EMAS, or the European, particularly German Environment Management and Audit, ISO 14001, Internationally Recognized Environmental Management Certification, SA 8000, Social Accountability International Labor Standard, AA 1000, International Accountability Assurance Reporting Standard, Copenhagen Charter, International Standard Involving Stakeholder and Communications, GRI Global Reporting Initiative, or the GRI 2000 International Sustainability Report. Let's discuss claims of appropriateness, understandability, truth, sincerity. And this is in association or in relation to CSR reporting. We explore how these characteristics, which for Habermas are always presumed in normal speech, can be guaranteed in corporate reporting. We find that taken together, the reporting frameworks address all of Habermas' validity claims. And here, the stakeholder is viewed as external party to the whole process or an outsider who the company needs to inform and convince. Discourse theory attempts to construct the universal conditions of human understanding. Since Habermas believes that human agreement is an important part of human behavior and necessary for social progress, he explores the general conditions that give natural speakers the ability to communicate rationally. These conditions are known as pragmatics or validity claims. Habermas argues that a set of unspoken validity claims underlies all the normal speech. These conditions are assumed by both speaker and listener and makes rational communication possible. These validity claims are truth, sincerity, the subjective truth of the propositions and understandability, the comprehensiveness of the propositions, appropriateness, or the extent to which the propositions comply with norms. Habermas' theory of communicative action is grounded in critical social theory or the CST. At the core, critical social theory seeks to emancipate humans from the material and ideological conditions that restrict their freedom. Direct validation of the information contained in all of these reports can be therefore helpful in guaranteeing the truthfulness of claims made. Appropriateness and understandability. Corporations need to determine what they can and should disclose to stakeholders and how to put this information in a format or context that allows the user to correctly interpret it. Two of the given examples are the GRI and the SA 8000. The GRI and the SA 8000 most directly address issues relating to appropriateness and understandability of corporate communication. The GRI and similar initiatives were developed through a lengthy process for identifying the basic needs and interests of a broad variety of stakeholder groups. Stakeholder consultation was used to determine or define what information stakeholders sought and for what purposes. This information was then used to determine what information was appropriate to communicate stakeholders, how it could be best communicated. This process was also used to help ensure that the information was understandable to recipients and by providing how that information is organized, referenced, labeled, and sometimes captured, measured, reported. ISO 14063, part of the ISO 14000 series, specifically addresses the effectiveness and by implication, the understandability of corporate communications to stakeholders. The GRI, designed to enhance the quality and rigor of the utility of sustainability reporting, provides a set of principles for sustainability reporting along with suggestions relating to the content and compilation of reports. The GRI identifies a large number of performance metrics relating to social, economic, and environmental issues and suggests that additional information is identified by stakeholders to be included in this report. The SA 8000 focuses more narrowly on issues relating to human rights and it defines a set of labor standards to be followed by companies reporting under the standard. Signatories to the standard agree to report publicly on their progress in implementing the labor standards and frameworks enhance the appropriateness of social reports by helping to ensure that information relevant to stakeholders is included in the reports. By providing means of standardization of the metrics and reports, the frameworks enhance the understandability of its CSR communication. Truth. The veracity of the information contained in the report must be assured. AA 1000 audit follows a set of standardized procedures which guarantees the credibility of reported information. The methodology emphasizes stakeholder interest and provides mechanisms to help avoid misstatements or omissions that could impact stakeholders' decisions or actions. Like financial audits, AA 1000 and similar assurance frameworks require rigorous planning, investigation, and documentation. They examine both the reported data, the effectiveness of organizational processes that ensure the reliability of the data. EMAS and the ISO both require ongoing verification. In order for CSR reports to be useful in making corporate activity transparent to stakeholders, the veracity of the information contained in the reports must then be assured, and there is evidence that financial markets have the disciplinary mechanisms which over time penalizes firms that communicate inaccurate information. Such mechanisms do not yet exist and may never be possible in the CSR realm due to the broad range of activities and consequences that can be addressed in CSR reports. Direct validation of the information contained in these reports can therefore be useful in guaranteeing the truthfulness of the claims made. Many of the models discussed do incorporate and recommend use of processes designed to ensure the accuracy of reported information through the verification process. The AE 1000 assurance standard is a process that provides a thorough and widely used method in validating the information in CSR reports. The standard provides methodology for auditing corporate CSR reports and activities underlying them. The AA 1000 provides a set of audit and accountability procedures that help ensure that the companies comply with standards such as the GRI that it has voluntarily adopted along with the law. It then provides the basis for assuring the validity of CSR reports that publicly communicate the outcomes of corporate activity. Sincerity. Habermas sincerity criteria is perhaps the most difficult to evaluate. While the truth criterion focuses on the factual truth of a statement, sincerity focuses on the subjective beliefs underlying the statement. Since there are no formal standards for CSR reporting, it is possible for firms to pick up and choose which items to include in the report and which to leave out. Thus, it would be possible to have a report that is factually correct but paints an inaccurate picture of performance. CSR reports are intended to provide transparency about the firm's activities, but the performance information alone may be insufficient to provide the transparency that the stakeholders desire. Environmental management system frameworks can fill this gap. Environmental management systems generally include environmental, moral discourse, and corporate social responsibility reporting, 55 strategy, goals, processes, measurement, and reward and feedback components, all under the oversight of top management. EMAS and the ISO 14000 series are standards firms can voluntarily adopt to help ensure that the goal of the improved environmental performance is embedded into its strategy, structures, and processes. Although specific environmental goals are unique to each firm rather than prescribed externally, all firms adopting these standards have the goal of improving environmental performance. Environmental management systems extend beyond to firm internal activities to those of their suppliers. Major suppliers to these firms must operate in their own environmental management systems. A similar requirement holds that under SA 8000 for supplier labor standards. These requirements prevent firms from outsourcing activities to firms with lower standards and provide incentives for supplier firms to improve their own standards. Meanwhile, the Copenhagen Charter is a stakeholder communication guideline designed to allow corporations and stakeholders to communicate about stakeholders' values and concerns. The iterative nature of this process implies that sincerity on the part of the top management is necessary. A specific part of the process calls for corporations to report their responses to the previously expressed concerns of the stakeholders. Moral discourse. Here, the stakeholders are viewed as participants in the process. This offers a relational view of the stakeholder, and in this paradigm, the result is acceptable to all the participants. We will discuss generality, autonomous evaluation, role taking, transparency, and power neutrality. Generality is the discussion wherein it should be open and accessible to all the interested parties. Autonomous evaluation, meanwhile, the participants must have the opportunity to fully express interests. Role taking, participants must attempt to view the situation from others' perspective. Transparency, participants must reveal their goals and intentions relevant to the issue. Power neutrality, the discussion must be free from coercion. In this part of the analysis, we return to Habermas for guidance on how communication among stakeholders might be designed such that it exhibits the characteristic of moral discourse and result in outcomes that are mutually acceptable to all the participants. Habermas theory operates at the societal level and is grounded in critical social theory. The basic goals of such theories are to understand the existence and origins of deficiencies in current society and to uncover more undesirable features and shape society to better meet the interests of the participants. Habermas argues that social goals can be achieved through a communicative action that incorporates the validity claims addressed above, and that is geared towards mutual understanding and consensus information. Habermas seeks to identify principles that establish the conditions under which such social self transformation and human progress can be achieved. Habermas holds that this achievement cannot come about through the application of administrative power of resources rather than it being pursued through a rational discourse among informed parties. Habermas proposes communicative action and discourse ethics as the means through which members of a society can conceive and pursue outcomes acceptable to all the parties affected by them. In his discussions of the discourse ethics, Habermas argues that moral norms gain validity not through their adherence to external universal criteria, as it is often claimed. Instead, norms are valid if they are developed through an open and fair discourse among all parties affected. Habermas builds on by work of Apple 1980 that outlines the condition for ideal speech, a discursive situation that can provide the foundation for the development of moral norms. Okay, so let's discuss further. Kettner 1993 distills Habermas' arguments about ideal speech into five propositions. Generality, the discussion should be open and accessible to all the interested parties. Autonomous evaluation, participants must have the opportunity to fully express interests. Role taking, participants must attempt to view the situation from others' perspective. Transparency, participants must reveal their goals and intentions relevant to the issue. Power neutrality, which is the discussion being free from coercion. Each of these principles can be applied within the context of CSR. The generality proposition suggests that corporations have the responsibility to allow all stakeholders to participate in discussions about matters that can affect their welfare. Before ethical discourse about social responsibility can take place, corporations must identify those constituency who holds a stake in corporate decisions. Generality. Habermas extends generality to all interested parties. Stakeholder theory is generally somewhat more restrictive and includes all parties who can be affected by corporate activity. Various stakeholder theories are more or less inclusive regarding which stakeholder groups or corporations that the corporation must recognize. Autonomous evaluation. This requires that participants in moral discourse must have the opportunity to express their interests and objectives, and to make assertions and to question assertions made by others. In practical sense, this requires corporations to identify relevant stakeholders and invite them or their representatives to participate in a discussion about the actions that might affect them. This principle requires corporations to go beyond the common practice of considering how their actions might affect stakeholders. The stakeholders must be allowed to speak for themselves. Role taking proposition. The role taking proposition requires all participants in the discourse to attempt to understand the perspective of other participants. Mutual understanding cannot be achieved when participants act strategically working to negotiate to achieve their own desired ends. Instead, participants attempt to truly understand the perspective of others and allow the force of the better argument or reason to prevail in developing mutually acceptable solutions. In CSR settings, this requires companies to move far beyond strategic stakeholder management and even past stakeholder consultations to true stakeholder engagement. Transparency. Transparency requires that parties in the discourse make their own position, goals, and interests known to the other members. Hidden or distorted information works against transparency objectives. Only with full disclosure can participants develop rational agreements that take the interests of all the parties into account. Although full transparency is unrealistic in the corporate realm, in which the companies hide information from their competitors and others for strategic purposes, it can nonetheless serve as an ideal for stakeholder engagement. Power neutrality. The final condition, power neutrality, is little discussed but critically important in the CSR bill. As discussed above, in moral discourse, one must fully disclose their own interests as required by transparency constraint and be allowed to make assertions and question those made by other parties as required by autonomous evaluation constraint. In order for this to take place, efforts must be made to provide a democratic setting in which all the participants have equal opportunity to speak and be heard. This is perhaps the most difficult condition to achieve in stakeholder engagement due to the strong power relationships that exist outside engagement and because the resources and capabilities possessed by stakeholders can vary so dramatically. In conditions under which stakeholders have an equal power, the organization must attempt to provide conditions for democratic participation. Conclusions. Part 1. Reynolds et al. Used the relational view and applied the theoretical frameworks of pragmatism in the approach to analyze CSR reporting. Under this perspective, CSR reporting becomes part of an ongoing discourse between the corporation and its stakeholders, rather than a one way communication about past performances. They use Habermas' theory of communicative action to provide guidance on how this discourse can be conducted in a manner that leads to morally justifiable outcomes. They examined how Habermasian principles are approximated in existing reporting models such as EMAs, ISO, SA 8000, AA 1000, and the Copenhagen Charter. In the first part of their analysis, the reporting models were examined for elements of truth, sincerity, understandability, and appropriateness. When viewed together, they concluded that these frameworks effectively address the four components of communicative validity, and in doing so, they serve to enhance the reliability and usefulness of CSR reports. Analysis 2, meanwhile, moves further to the question of moral discourse or among the concerned constituents. They utilize Habermas' principle of ethical discourse and assess the reporting models based on the five ideal speech propositions: generality, autonomous evaluation, role taking, transparency, and power neutrality. Analysis 2 finds that reporting models incorporate some of the aspects, such as the ones mentioned above, and transparency is also addressed, but tends to be a one way communication rather than a democratic discourse. Power neutrality, which is necessary to help society be molded into a full moral discourse, is ideal, but it's not achieved through any of these frameworks. Choose one preposition in Reynolds' analysis to and explain why is it important. Thank you, and this ends my report.